Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to another session of Learn with Lo. We're going to be picking up where we left off last week. If you were following along with our series here in the month of July, I have been talking about hormonal birth control. I had this whole slew, I felt like, I think it's been going on for quite some time, but maybe I just became more aware of it. But I felt like over the last few months, definitely last 3 months, I've had more and more inquiries, initial consults, current clients that were really talking about this concept around hormonal birth control. Maybe they were on it and used it, or they were looking to transition off of it, or they were coming to me after transitioning off of it. And I just felt like there was so many conversations. I'm like, wow, like you just kind of get these I want to say kind of events or common themes that come up, and definitely birth control kept screaming at me over and over again. And so I just took that as a sign from my higher self to really dive into this topic for everybody. So not just keeping it behind the scenes of what I discuss with current clients, obviously that's going to be way more customized, but being able to just kind of bring these conversations to a bigger landscape for everybody to benefit from. So if you were with us last week, we really just talked about the basics behind hormonal birth control. What is it? What are the different forms, different options? We got to get a chance to really debunk some of the common myths and some of the common statements that were told around hormonal birth control. And we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of those today as well too. So like I said, bigger picture, bigger passion of this conversation really lies because I see so often men and women, but specifically women having some hormonal imbalance symptoms, whether it's anxiety, fatigue, brain fog, headaches, acne, changes in hormonal patterns, menstrual cycles, unexplained weight gain. I mean, you name it, gut issues. And they tend to go to their trusted medical providers to seek answers for these things. Now, the hard part is I tend to hear women who have gone through the rigmarole of different practitioners, or their primary care provider, and really they tend to then come to me and say, well, I went to my doctor and he told me I should go on X prescription to get rid of X symptom, right? That's kind of the commonality that we're starting to see now, just because we're utilizing some of these medical practitioners for general health and wellness, when in fact they're there for triage care, right? They know you have X, I give you Y, we fix said problem, right? So just kind of mismanagement or maybe misuse of those. And so they're not really getting the answers that they deserve, because they're getting more of a quick fix, more of a Band-Aid solution when they use that type of avenue. Maybe they're interested in that. Cool, great, awesome. But maybe they're not necessarily interested in the quick fix or the Band-Aid, and they don't really have any additional follow-up or conversation. So my issue tends to be when I hear people where it's like, yeah, I went to my doctor and he prescribed me Adderall for my brain fog. It's like, okay, cool. What were the other conversations? Did you guys have a conversation of where that brain fog was coming from? Did you guys have conversations about lifestyle, nutrition, blood sugar management, anything like that? They're like, no, not at all. Or I was given Xanax for my anxiety, or she gave me birth control for my migraines and my acne. And that's really, I think, where a lot of this conversation really stemmed from, was recognizing that a lot of times of these Band-Aid solutions, especially for women, a lot of times they get handed that birth control story. So all of these are really just Band-Aids for a bigger problem, and I want to help people to continue to zoom out, and birth control being one of those. So I feel like this is an opportunity for us to really just see and really discuss what hormonal birth control is, what it does, and have the true pros, cons, informed consent conversation that I wish were happening in all practitioner offices. There's just not the bandwidth or the time for these practitioners to be giving that. And that's an unfortunate reality of how they get compensated through insurance companies, and it just doesn't bode them that opportunity to really educate their patient and really outline for them pros, cons, option 1, option 2, option 3. What do you feel most confident with, whether that's hormonal birth control or some other natural contraceptive or treatment strategy, right? So the hard part is that I would say that even some very early signs of hormonal imbalances in females, whether it's usually even in their teens, the unfortunate part is I see that usually the first intervention tends to be hormonal birth control. And this is happening when females are young adolescents or like young teens. And I think we're starting to realize, but it's just becoming more and more mainstream about how detrimental that can be to the full development of that brain to ovarian connection. That brain to ovarian connection can take about 12 years to fully mature. So there's a lot of research and practitioners out there that are discussing that when we put in a hormonal birth control at such a young age, we're essentially like freezing that female at that moment in time of wherever she's at in that maturation process. It's like, oop, halt, stop. Right. And so then when or if they decide to try to come off of hormonal birth control, maybe it's in their 20s or their 30s when they're trying to conceive, and it's the first time they've come off of hormonal birth control since they were 14 years old, their body is a 14-year-old again. Right. And so they're like, whoa, what's going on? This brain to ovary connection, it hasn't had to develop since we were 14 because we really just kind of shut it off, right? For the better part of the last decade or more that we implemented hormonal birth control for our menstrual cycle symptoms without really asking maybe a bigger question, or how are we supporting lifestyle nutritionally on top of utilizing hormonal birth control. So just like I talked about last week, this is not an anti-prescription stance. If you guys have been here, you know that I live in the gray area. I love being able to offer individuals like, hey, this is what we can get from the pharmaceutical side. This is what we can get if we want to use the prescriptions of nutrition and lifestyle and movement and nervous system regulation and supplementation. Both of those worlds can coexist together. So it's not an anti-birth control, anti-prescription stance here at all. It's really just recognizing that it's not my role to tell women what feels right for them, but I do feel a passion for making sure that women feel that informed consent. I think that every woman should be able to have all of the options laid out on the table for her, pros, cons, and then every woman knowing and having full autonomy in their body, they know what's right for them. And if they decide to pursue hormonal birth control, great. If they decide to use that in conjunction with some lifestyle changes, awesome. If they want to put that on the back burner for a second and really try to think about more of a natural way to regulate their hormones, we support any of those decisions 110%, right? It's more about the education up front. So let's kind of review where we left off last week, and really just identifying so that we're all on the same page. What is hormonal birth control? There's lots and lots of different options here. We have tablets, we have patches, we have pills, we have injections, we have insertable devices. All of them are delivering steroid drugs to suppress ovarian function. Right? I said that very specifically and very clearly, that they are delivering steroid drugs to impact the brain to ovary connection, right? These are not hormones, right? These are synthetic hormones, but really synthetic hormones are really just a different version of a steroid drug. So these synthetic hormones, whether it's synthetic estradiol, synthetic progesterone, which is usually called progestin, they are used in higher doses than what our body naturally makes. And what happens is they start to override and compete with our body's natural hormonal production. So that's where we got to talk about like some of the myths and some of the statements that are out there around hormonal birth control, and just making sure that people know like, okay, what is the real message versus like us kind of trying to make these things sound absolutely 100% harmless and safe and zero side effects. It's like, probably can't have your cake and eat it too, right? There's got to be some sort of middle ground where we recognize that there is risk involved here when we're utilizing steroid drugs or we're utilizing synthetic hormones to shut off that ovarian connection, right? So common myths of birth control that we're told that, again, I want to definitely bring to the surface. So I know I talked about some of these last week, but it's worth highlighting them again because they're that important. Number one that I hear, lots of women come in and they say, oh yeah, I was told that birth control would regulate my cycles, my menstrual cycles. That is false. Birth control does not regulate any cycles. Birth control shuts off your cycle. So you are not ovulating. And if you're not ovulating, you don't have a cycle. Like, your menstrual cycle is not your bleed, right? So even if we're on like an oral contraceptive, or maybe we're on an IUD device where we do still have a bleed, that is a withdrawal bleed. That is not a period, right? That is not a menstrual cycle because you didn't ovulate. Ovulation is the main event of our menstrual cycle because that's where we ovulate the egg. That's where we create a corpus luteum. That's where we secrete progesterone, right? And we'll talk about progesterone a lot more today. But if we're not getting ovulation, then we're not getting progesterone. And if we're not getting progesterone, then what's the point? Like, that is the grand finale, not the bleed or the shedding of the uterine lining. So even if we have a consistent period on hormonal birth control, don't be duped that, or I should say this, even if we're having a consistent bleed on hormonal birth control, don't be duped that that is the same thing as a natural period, because it is not, right? You're not creating progesterone. That is a withdrawal bleed just to shed the uterine lining. Okay. Myth number 2. A lot of women are told that birth control will balance my hormones. That's also false, because birth control contains synthetic hormones, that they are like physiologically higher doses, like we said, and they compete with our natural hormones. So these hormones are not identical in any way, shape, or form to what your body makes naturally. In fact, things like progestin is not progesterone. Right? And we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later too, but progesterone in its natural form actually then converts to something called allopregnenolone, and allopregnenolone is a precursor to GABA, which is a neurotransmitter in your brain, hence why it makes us feel so calm. There's a reason why people call progesterone nature's Xanax. Right? Yet we have a whole host of women out there that are running around and they're anxious and they're feeling like really easily triggered, very easily irritable, and that's because they're not creating any of their own natural progesterone at all. In fact, they're just shoving their body full of synthetic hormones that are not the same at all, right? So I think that that's kind of one of the misconceptions, is that birth control will balance your hormones. It does not, because it just contains synthetic steroid drugs or synthetic hormones. I think this is another misconception that a lot of like perimenopausal women are fed, to where they may have zero interest. They're beyond the point of like fertile years, they're maybe have kids, they're done having kids, like that chapter of their life is over, and they are fed, they're like, oh yeah, take hormonal birth control because these are the hormones that you're gonna need in menopause anyway. Okay, full stop. Like, who is that practitioner provider that told you that? Like, he needs a little update on the research, right? These are synthetic hormones. These are not what you need in menopause. If anything, you're gonna want bioidentical hormones, not what is found in birth control in any way, shape, or form, right? So there's a myth we can kind of dispel there. And then the last myth that we kind of talked about last week too, was that birth control will fix your hormonal imbalance symptoms such as acne, anxiety, migraines, etc. And we know that that is not true either, because birth control really is just a band-aid. We're not fixing anything. We're not treating the root cause of why is there a progesterone to estrogen imbalance? Why are we not tolerating the drops and cycles in our hormones? That's usually where women get like cyclical migraines, is usually around ovulation, where their hormones drop to stimulate ovulation, or they experience that right before they bleed. They get that drop in hormones, so they get more of those like menstrual migraines, right? This is not something that's fixed by birth control. We can cover it up, but if we took birth control off, all of those symptoms come back. So to me, that's not something that fixes or heals anything. That's just covering it up. It's like, how do we get our body to tolerate those drops and those fluctuations in hormones naturally? Like, there's millions of women out there that have been having menstrual cycles for millions of years. And it's like, why do not all women have that issue then? It's probably because we can dive in and we can really look at the root cause of where that's coming from, and truly do that without having to cover it up and create downstream issues, right? And I think that's really the biggest thing here that I wanted to expand upon today, is giving you guys a little bit more of like, I don't know, I guess you could call it like real talk around what are some of the risks associated and what are some of the like the downstream cons column of utilizing a hormonal birth control, right? So if we're going to come to the table and have an informed consent conversation, we can talk about all of the pros of that, of the fact that it's like, yes, this is life-changing for some women, especially women that are struggling with very heavy, very painful menstrual cycles that are decreasing their quality of life. It's taking them out of work. It's taking them away from time with friends, time with family. They're literally having to rearrange their whole life because of a menstrual cycle that they're having monthly. Absolutely, like these pharmaceutical interventions can be life-changing for those women. But my question would be, okay, what are we doing in conjunction with the birth control to make sure that we don't have to rely or utilize this forever just to have a life, right, outside of our menstrual cycles? What are we doing to really look at estrogen dominance? What are we doing to support progesterone and estrogen ratio? What are we doing to support our adrenals to be able to tolerate those drops in hormones? Do we need to be looking at gut health and estrogen reabsorption? These are the types of things that like my world deals with, so that we don't just have to have a pill for every ill type conversation. But regardless, it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about the pros of utilizing it, let's also talk about the inherent risks so that everybody can come in and have like full blown on the table. Here it is. You decide for yourself what feels best, right? So how to kind of really think about some of the potential side effects of hormonal birth control. Number one, which you hear about quite a bit, hormonal birth control is labeled and recognized as a class 1 carcinogen by the International Agency on Research for Cancer. Okay, it is, right? So we know that that's public information out there. We know that there is some risk involved in some overgrowths, and specifically like estrogen related cancers, whether that's breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, things like that, right? It's like, oh, okay. So messing with my body's natural hormones, throwing in some synthetic hormones into the mix at very high doses. Yep, that makes sense, especially if I don't really have great hormonal detoxification patterns through my liver, through my gut. Like if I'm taking in a large amount of hormones, but I don't know how to like cycle and get rid of them, that could cause an issue. We could see that that's not out of bounds, right? Same reason why we also see an increased risk of blood clots on hormonal birth control. I recently started working with a female who had this exact scenario. She had blood clots in her liver, and so had to go in and get those blood clots cleared. Now, obviously not a great candidate for hormonal birth control anymore, right? Lesson learned. A lot of times too, we hear hormonal birth control linked to depression and anxiety. Very much so connected to what I just talked about with that progesterone, right? We're not creating natural progesterone if we're not ovulating. And that's the whole point of birth control. It's like, don't ovulate, we do not want babies. It's like, okay, cool. Like, challenge accepted, job well done. But with that, if we're not ovulating, we're not creating progesterone. If we're not creating progesterone, we don't get that calming effect of progesterone by getting that allopregnenolone or that GABA receptor. So then we're left feeling more of that anxiety, more of that depression, more of those really heavy kind of PMS type symptoms. And I think another connection to it is that hormonal birth control also causes a depletion in a lot of nutrients. And so that can also be related to mood as well, specifically your key fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin E, key minerals like zinc, selenium, all of your B vitamins, things like that too. And that's why we also tend to see one of the side effects of birth control could be things like hair loss. I see that quite frequently, where like thinning hair or kind of like losing hair because of these nutrient deficiencies. Gut dysbiosis, specifically like IBD or IBS, can be very much associated with long-term birth control use, and then even bigger issues of autoimmunity developing down the road. So lots of different potential risks, not to mention that a lot of women experience low sex drive while on hormonal birth control as well too, because if it's going to shut off one hormone, it's going to shut off all those hormones, and really just making sure that we understand the pros and the cons kind of going into it, right? So if we know some of those side effects or the potential downsides of utilizing hormonal birth control, one of the things that I like to do is just, again, empower women. Here it is. Lay it on the table. Options. We could go this way, this way, this way, this way. Once I lay it all out, like what feels right for you, right? Let's be a teamwork in this decision. Like, what sounds the best for you based off of where you're at right now in this life? It doesn't have to be a forever decision, but like right now where you're at, what feels the best? Cool. Then when we come to that, whether it's they decide they want to transition off of hormonal birth control under their doctor's discretion, or they feel like they want to get a hormonal birth control on board and they haven't in a while under their doctor's discretion, cool. Then our work together can then be, how do we support the body on or off of this, right? So that's where I want to kind of end out today a little bit, is thinking about like, okay, regardless of where you're at in your journey, because sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming and intimidating when someone's coming in and it's like, I'm on hormonal birth control every day and like I'm depleting my nutrients and creating gut dysbiosis and lowering my natural hormonal production. Like, it can feel overwhelming, like to feel that. I don't want anyone to feel that type of like anxiousness. I just want the information to be out there. You take the education, you do what you want with it, but regardless of whether you decide to stay or leave on it, there's things we can do, right? So it doesn't have to be this like, oh my gosh, I have to knee jerk and get off of this ASAP. It's like, what can we do to support your body the best way that we can, whether you're on it or you're off of it, or you're looking to transition off, right? I usually don't recommend cold turkey, especially if you've been on it for a while. But to each their own. I just had a gal the other day. She's like, yeah, I visited, because I always refer to the prescribing physician. Obviously, I'm like, you need to go to your OB and you need to talk to her that this is of interest to you. My client went to her and she's like, yeah, I discussed exactly like we rehearsed, and I felt really confident going into that conversation. And she told me I could just stop cold turkey. I was like, cool. If she says that, then let's run with that, right? Does that feel right for you, right? And then we can really work on like, okay, we can decide when we want to stop cold turkey. And then maybe we should use a few months here to really prepare your body for that, so that you don't get all of those like whoosh, all of those side effects that happen from coming off of something like that. And then we're like realizing all of these nutrient depletions and all of that good stuff. So first thing I probably think about when it comes to supporting the body, whether you're on hormonal birth control, you're coming off of hormonal birth control, or you're preparing to come off of it, a whole host of different nutrients that are depleted by hormonal birth control. Like I said, vitamin E, vitamin C, a lot of our like antioxidants, which kind of goes back to the liver and our detoxification, folic acid, B vitamins, especially like B2, B6, B12, magnesium, zinc, selenium. Like, many of these nutrients are needed for thyroid function and detoxification, right? Very kind of common theme. So to me, I'm always like, is it a coincidence that a lot of these women are having issues with thyroid or gut issues down the road after stopping hormonal birth control? I'm like, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it like lines up and actually makes perfect sense. But I just don't think that conversation or those resources are out there to really fix it, right? So just for clickbait and buzzwords, let's really talk about a kind of a birth control detox protocol, although I hate the word protocol, to be honest, or detox, because I think everybody thinks like, oh, celery juice. I'm like, no, our body actually needs legit food and nutrients to detox properly. So probably not a celery juice cleanse that we're talking about here. But when I think about like, okay, how do I support my body's transition either on or off of this? Number one, we got to balance our blood sugar. It ain't going to go very well, and it's not going to go very far if we're riding this blood sugar roller coaster, either not eating enough, eating too much for our energy demands, not eating enough for our energy demands, underfueling protein, underfueling fiber, eating inconsistently, yo-yo dieting, cutting carbs. I mean, like all of that, like typical diet culture dogma, like, yeah, that ain't gonna work very well. So we probably should get off of those types of mentality and mindset and learn how to truly nourish and fuel our body, because that's then gonna support goal number 2, which is replace some of those depleted nutrients, right? This is not a supplement conversation, right? It's like, all of your supplements have to go like first pass through your liver, and I'm trying to support your liver elsewhere. So I try to do as much as possible from a food first standpoint as we can, because I just don't see the need. If we can get these things through food, why not, right? It just requires us to be comfortable and confident, like learning how to fuel and nourish my body and not just like eat the least amount possible. I'm like, then you're definitely going to have nutrient deficiencies if you're out there thinking about calories. Like, it's just going to happen. So when I think about like repleting nutrients with a whole food diet, some people could even at this point too consider doing a micronutrient panel, where you get to really look at status of some of those key vitamins and minerals that you may be depleted with as well too. Number 3 is supporting the liver, right? I want to support that through food. We can also support that through antioxidants. We can support that through supplements. We can support that through things like even castor oil packs. But the liver and the liver detoxification requires a large amount of amino acids. So, hey, protein. Liver also requires a large amount of micronutrients, specifically B vitamins, are really big there as well too. Flavonoids, so like colorful foods. We can use things like bitter foods are really good for the liver. You can use even different like herbal remedies, whether it's like milk thistle, nettles, chicory root, burdock root, things like that, to really help support the liver and liver detoxification. Number 4 on the protocol would be supporting estrogen detoxification, which plays hand in hand with the liver, but also plays a little bit into the gut as well too. How our body works is like we create hormones and we want to use them and lose them, especially the hormones that are like growth promoting. So estrogen is a growth promoting hormone, testosterone is growth promoting, insulin is growth promoting, right? So we create them and it's like use them for a job, and then the liver has to package them, recycle them, and we like poop them out. Right? That's the ideal, so that we don't get a buildup of these hormones in our system. So definitely supporting estrogen detoxification pathways can be huge. And then number 5 is going to be restoring the gut microbiome here. Thinking about things like short chain fatty acids. We need to think about supporting the immune response and supporting things like secretory IgA. We need to be looking at potential food sensitivities, maybe even diving into something like a GI map test or stool testing. I think can be really, really helpful for people to really see like digestive capacity. Are we breaking down our food? Are we eliciting an immune response with any foods? Is there any sort of dysbiosis or any sort of overgrowth that we want to be tackling and kind of evening out a little bit? All in all, that kind of like 5-step routine, all the way from balancing blood sugar, repleting depleted minerals, supporting the liver, supporting estrogen detox, and then last, restoring the gut microbiome. That's the work that has to be done for individuals that have either been long-standing on hormonal birth control or individuals that are looking to like stay on hormonal birth control but try to give their body the best chance to feel its best, and maybe even tackle some of the root causes of why they need to really lean on that as a crutch in the first place, right? So much fun stuff to kind of throw at you guys there. If you feel like this is a topic of conversation that is relevant for you, you want more information, you can always go to my bio. You can click the link in my bio, and there is opportunities there to either apply to work with me one-on-one. There's also opportunity to sign up for my Revive, Restore, Renew You program, which is an accelerated 4-month program where we get to dive into all of these things and more. And all of those opportunities are available to you just clicking the link in my bio, and that will be able to give me more custom information. So I won't be able to give any custom protocols or information for you, so don't even DM me. You'll have to do that within the confines of a more HIPAA compliant platform. But beyond that, again, happy to, like I said, facilitate answering questions and connecting you guys to some resources so that you can further this conversation for yourself and really kind of figure out where you might need some additional support. So I want to have very similar kind of conversations around like hormone replacement therapy. So we're going to be dabbling into that with our next Learn with Lo. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my 2-part hormone birth control series here. And if you missed part 1, you can go check out under the section of my reels. You can find last week's as well as this week. So send to a friend and come back next week for more.